right, this is our January 2023 Public Health and Safety meeting. And we have Cindy Rickards and I here, and the mayor is with us on Zoom. Okay. Bob Weisberg stepped down from council, so we're waiting for the next appointment. So we're two council members at the moment. Okay, so we're going to start with approval of minutes. I think we're going to, do we have, let's see.
I don't think we have October and November.
Okay.
Do we have December?
Yeah, I guess we'll have to come back to that.
Alright, so here's what we'll do for next month. Again, kind of similar to this meeting. I'll take a look back at the agendas for those 3 meetings, and we'll produce minutes for us that meet the, what we legally need to provide for that.
Okay. Thank you, Sue. So then next we go to public comment. And we're going to start with folks here with us in the room, and then there may be others on Zoom. So the way we do it is we ask you to state your name and address, and we try to limit the comments to 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so why don't we start here?
Hi, do I stand up? My name's Molly Burke. I live at 215 Iona. I am here just to follow up on last month's public safety meeting with the concerns that were raised about safety on Iona. We were glad to see the speeding monitor go up, but know that that's really just a way to get the process started. We're glad that it was there. And in the meantime, a number of us did circulate a petition just to try to show all of our concern, most of our concern, many people on the 200 block of Iona, just for safety, obviously. And we're curious what comes next and what we can hope for. That's it.
Okay, thank you. And we have your petition, so we'll enter that in. So, thank you. It is on our agenda later today.
Yeah.
So, okay, so if you could state your name and address.
Also, sir, just please note for people on Zoom as well, sir, you're also not required to make a public comment either. If you do, we're happy to hear it.
Peer pressure, I'm in. My name's Jay Whitmore. I live at 121 Windsor, and I know we're discussing the stop signs later in this meeting, but I just wanted to bring up a couple points in addition to the study that was done with monitoring traffic and presumably the speed. I'd say 3 points. The first is that speed's not everything. Pedestrian safety is still an issue. When folks aren't slowing down into a crosswalk area where there are kids crossing the street, I think that's just an additional concern to take into account. Point number 2 would be that I think we're conveniencing motorists who use Windsor as a cut-through to Montgomery. So I just would ask the rhetorical question of why are we prioritizing people who aren't stopping in our downtown area and visiting our businesses. They're just blowing through anyway, so I think we should make it as hard as possible, frankly, for them to use this as a cut-through. And then the third point, just more of a minor point, is that even given those concerns, there's a little bit of ambiguity when you have motorists who aren't familiar with the area, since so much of Narberth is set up as a 4-way stop grid. I've seen many motorists in my time here, only about 6 months, kind of creep in, assume that there's a stop sign, and then create an unsafe situation for other drivers and pedestrians. So just wanted to throw that out there, and yeah, looking forward to the agenda item later.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you both for coming in person. So we're going to go next to the folks on Zoom.
Alright, so our method for folks on Zoom, everyone's muted right now, and you do not have the ability to unmute yourself unless you're a co-host. So if you can either use the raise hand function on Zoom or literally raise your hand, I'll call on you, you'll get a prompt to be able to unmute yourself, and then you'll be welcome to make a public comment for a couple of minutes. Alright, so anyone on Zoom like to make a public comment? All right, the first hand that's you raised is Alex McMillan.
Yeah, hi. My name's Alex McMillan. I live 217 Iona Avenue. I just want to reiterate the concerns that Molly had mentioned about safety on Iona. I have a kid who has run out into the street a few times, and it just really concerns us, and we want to do whatever we can to slow down motorists. So just to reiterate Molly's comments and support everything that she said.
All right. All right, I don't see anyone else signaling they would like to make a public comment.
Okay. So, like I said, we'll return to traffic concerns in a few minutes. All right, so just moving through the agenda, we have a couple other things here. The first of which is the plastics under Environmental Advisory Council. It's something we've started talking about. Cindy, I know we're also trying to manage the workflow, given that we're short-staffed, so I don't know if we want to take a minute to kind of outline what we would be interested in as a committee, and you know, we might not be in a position to take it to council for a few months. You know, I'm just aware that we're short-staffed.
Completely. I do think, you know, I want to hear from Samantha, but media, Haverford, Ambler just banned the plastic bags.
Yeah.
We're currently not enforcing our plastics ban ordinance. I actually think this would be easier, just to outright say we can't have them. And when we leaded the plastic ordinance in 2017, we were standing alone, and now really the surrounding area has done the same, including Philadelphia. So it may just make life easier. I don't know what the toll is if John writes the ordinance, we vote on it. I don't know what the lift is to the office staff.
Well, I think there's going to be committee time that John's going to have to draft an ordinance. And it's not so much John's time as his prioritization. Like, honestly, I think the committee's time and John's time, like the solid waste ordinance element, I find like much more pressing. Like, I absolutely support what we're talking about doing here. But I just think in the scale of priority, I think that that's some of the other stuff this committee is working on. It's going to take precedence. So John would have to write an ordinance. We would have to present it here. You all would have to be fine with that ordinance. Then it'd have to go to council. Council would have to be fine with that ordinance. Then we'd have to adopt it. And then we'd actually have to enforce it.
So, you know, I was able to talk with Samantha just about some of the things on the horizon. And the solid waste ordinance, I know is one that we need to deal with this year because of the trash contract with Republic will expire. So, this is something I'd like to do. I guess my thought is maybe we can wait a month or something until the staff.
I mean, I'll say this, the way to like speed run this if you want is if one of those ordinances, if you just off the top of your head know that one of those ordinances is fine just to change, you know, the word to Narberth in every spot where it mentions another town, you know, then that would make it pretty quick to do. But if we think it's going to require any discussion or anything like that.
Well, the Radnor one that you were able to share, I think is pretty close to what we want. It's the ban on, it covers the bags, but it doesn't, and then I think it doesn't include styrofoam or takeout containers or plastic utensils. So they're kind of two different ordinances that I've seen.
Honestly, I would ask the EAC to say, can you please look at these multiple ordinances? Give us, I mean, they led the charge on the plastics ordinance. It wasn't me. It was the expert said, this is what you should do. We all said, yeah, you're the experts. We agree with that. It did take a significant amount of John Walker's time because there were no examples.
Right.
So this, I would say, EAC, what do you think we should do?
There we go.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, that's a real time commitment, so there we go.
And council should not be debating the nuances of
There we
that.
go. That sounds great.
Okay, good.
Because I agree with you, solid waste and trash is a massive issue.
Okay, so let's do that.
Okay.
I can talk to the EAC
Okay.
folks about that.
Rob?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
While they're looking at it, can you have the EAC look at the environmental impact of the use of paper bags versus plastic bags? Because with the elimination of plastic bags, you're going to have an uptick in the use of paper bags. And I'd like, if they can, as long as they're looking at the issue, I'd like them to look at which one has a greater environmental impact.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there are different provisions in here in the sample ordinance for paper bags, plastic bags. So, yeah, we'll ask the AAC to look at it.
Yeah, I think it's worth looking at, and as long as they're investigating the environmental impact, I think that's an important aspect of it.
And just so you know, Andrew, I mean, there are always exemptions built into these ordinances for specific uses.
Okay.
So.
I mean, there are municipalities that just ban bags. You know, people use reusable bags. I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll suggest that. But
We'll get into it down the line, but I think that would have a heavy impact on small business, on some of our small businesses.
Okay, so we'll come back to it. Thank you for that. I think that's a good solution. We'll go to the EAC. I also know the EAC is working on the CCA. They're working with the CCA working group. So.
Oh, good.
And because of Narberth's willingness to explore that possibility, we're starting to see other boroughs take an interest.
that's right.
And that's really the goal, right? Is to kind of be willing to take the lead so that other communities can join us. So I'm excited about that. We'll see. So thank you, Samantha, for being willing to do that as well. All right, so now I think we can go to Shade Tree we have on here. I'll have to check in with Rick to see if they need anything from us, but I think they're moving right along with their planned spring planting.
Can I look back to that though? Because I had asked, you know, we had property owners that redid the sidewalk out front on Narberth Avenue and took out the tree. And I did have a conversation with Rick about this in the fall planting to say, can we by right, particularly on the downtown businesses, say we're putting in the tree to make the treescape in our downtown business. You don't get to elect to remove a tree in the right of way. And Rick seemed to obviously agree with the idea of a treescape in downtown is very important and felt as if the shade tree could absolutely work with Public Works if need be to clear that tree bed. So can we,
Okay.
I do think that's timely if we're going to make the spring planting.
Yeah. That's on North Narberth?
North Narberth, yeah.
Okay. They may have that. I mean, I know Shade Tree's done that in the past where they will plant in bits.
I
But
think
in
this
this
is on
case-
his radar, but he did say we should loop back in the spring
Okay.
to talk about this.
Okay. I can ask Rick about
And we might want to even look across from there's the business office building with the garden bed that goes unkempt.
Yeah.
And often overgrows into the sidewalk. You know, perhaps that's something that Rick and the Shade Tree Commission can look.
Across the street.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get to the traffic concerns, because I believe we have, do we have our engineer with us?
We do. Yeah, my thanks to Mike Schneider, our traffic engineer, for joining us this morning.
Okay, all right, welcome, Mike, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Mike, you're, okay, good.
Yeah, I was able to unmute myself, I guess. But good morning.
So, okay, so we're just gonna, I don't know, Samantha, do you want to
Sure,
kind of walk
yeah.
us through?
Yeah, I'll kind of start us off on each item here, and then Mike, I'll welcome your additional thoughts, and then we'll kind of turn over to you, Rob, to lead discussion amongst the committee and members of the public here. So first item was when we talked about for a few months here now, the concern about the sight lines over at Conway Ave and Price Ave. Right now, it's just a two-way stop. However, we had discussed whether or not it should be a four-way stop. We had our code enforcement officer go look at it. The vegetation present was not found to be a violation of our various ordinances in that regard. So Mike went out and took a look at it and found that given that vegetation, given the other factors going on, Mike, please let me know if I'm correct in summarizing your report and saying that despite the traffic volume and despite the speed, given the sightline challenges at that intersection, making it a four-way stop is an appropriate action if we wanted to pursue that.
Yeah, that's accurate. And when looking at warrants for multi-way stops, volume is sort of the number one, volume and speeding. But sight distance is also considered if there's no practical way to improve the sight distance. And based on how established the sight distance limitations are out there, it would not be practical to remove everything that's in the way of the sight lines to obtain the needed minimum sight distance. So per the memo I sent over, I'm recommending that be converted to a multi-way stop.
Great.
Sounds like the committee supports that.
Yes, yes.
10-year conversation.
Yes,
We
thank
need a
you.
stop sign. Yes, perfect.
Thank you. We're very happy with
So
that.
here's all I'll have Public Works work on getting that put in. We will need to do an ordinance as well, but we'll get that, we'll get that ordinance taken care of, and we'll get those signs out there.
Yeah, and as I'd mentioned in the memo, we should add all way underneath all the stop signs now that it's switching to a multi-way stop. And it's always good, even if it's temporary, to put advanced stop ahead, if they're not used to stopping on that roadway. And even sometimes you could put like battery operated red flashers on top of the new stop signs to really get drivers' attention. You have a lot of folks that have been driving that road for a lot of years without stopping. So anytime a new stop sign goes in place, I always recommend that some temporary battery operated flashers on top, and even if they're temporary stop ahead signs, even if they're construction orange, just to let people know there's a change to the traffic pattern there.
Great, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I definitely trust you and our Public Works manager to work out those details.
That'll work.
All right, if I may proceed to the next item. All right, so next item, I'm glad Mr. Whitmore is here with us this morning. He had submitted the concern to the borough under our old procedure where one concern was required, but I have no doubt that multiple folks on Windsor probably feel the way he does about the situation there. So we do have, we were recently able to gather the data for traffic volume and speed. However, I'm not sure if Mike has had a chance to really digest that information yet, in the same way that he was able to digest the information for Conway and Price. Like we said, we'll want to look at not just traffic volume and speed, but also any sightline issues at those intersections. So Mike, I don't necessarily put you on the spot here, but I was curious to see, since the data is pretty recent, if you've had any chance to look at it, or if maybe next month you'll have a recommendation for us.
It'll be more next month, but I did go through the preliminary data. So what I've seen is, it's not going to meet any sort of stop sign warrant for volume, and they very rarely do. Just for everyone's reference, to meet a multi-way stop warrant for volume, the side street, the lower volume street, needs 200 units, which could be a car, a pedestrian, a bike across the intersection from that minor street. 200 an hour for 8 hours. So that's a lot of traffic and pedestrians. You're just not going to get it. So for these two intersections, I'd look to some of the additional requirements for multi-way stops that you can use to justify one, to see if one is warranted. Speed is obviously a factor. There's also, if it's a high pedestrian generating area near the intersection, you can justify for pedestrian safety. I know the park's pretty close to there. So I'd go out and do sort of my normal survey of the intersections, look at sight distance, look at what's in the area, and then provide you with a report that we can discuss in more detail next week. I did hear some, I think one of the public comments was for that, and I saw there were a couple petitions that went in. So it seems like the major concern is pedestrian safety crossing, vehicles coming out. and speeding. You know, we have a lot of stop signs on Windsor, and then this sort of section where we don't have a couple. And it seems like based on the speed report that folks are getting up pretty quick at times on that area. I think I saw, you know, it's tough to think someone could go over 50 miles an hour on that road, but they do. Every once in a while, I've stood out there. I've seen people come by pretty fast. So I'll look at that and report next week. But I would say that volume definitely doesn't meet the warrants. But I'll look at all other factors and go through the typical publications, both PennDOT and the manual and uniform traffic control devices that we use, and look at all the warrants and see if anything applies. And short of, you know, just looking at multi-way stops, I always look to see if there's any other recommendations that can maybe help bring additional attention to ped crossings in the area if multi-way stops are not warranted for those intersections. And then we can have a discussion based on what I find next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clarifying question. So, Mike, not to diminish your work and the data, but what legal threshold or requirement do we have to have? It's near a park. Our comprehensive plan says we're doing pedestrian first planning. Why can we not just put a stop sign there?
So if you don't follow the warrants and put up warranted stop signs, they can be challenged and removed. And the challenge would be that you have to show that you followed the warrant studies, both from PennDOT and MUTCD, the other manual, and an engineer has said it meets warrants for an all-way stop, or they're challenged and removed. And it's a liability issue. So that's it really, is that, you know, it can be challenged. You can't ticket at it if it's not justified. And it's typically not a good practice to have unwarranted stop signs. I can tell you just about every municipality in the state has a lot of unwarranted stop signs that have gone in over the years. But as a professional, it's got to meet some level of warrants to be able to be enforceable and to stay in place. Because if someone didn't like it, they could challenge it, and you know, wouldn't look good for everybody at that point.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, but it sounds like we meet one of those requirements, which it's because it's near the park.
It could be. I'll say until I go out and look at it, I don't want to say for sure what it meets. I just want a chance to go out and factor in everything that I see there. And, you know, adjacent to the park, I think the exact warrant reads near locations that generate high pedestrian volumes. So I think a park could be noted as that. You know, I guess it's one way to look at it. It's a little nebulous is what is high pedestrian volumes. Do we have to count the pedestrians crossing there to have some justification to show that we do have pedestrians crossing at that location? That could be part of it as well. So it's a good point, though, you bring up of, you know, it is close to a park. If it seems like multi-way stops are a good idea, but based on my engineering judgment, I can usually find a warrant if we're looking at them. But I definitely need to do the due diligence and go through and make sure that it does meet warrants.
Perfect. Well, I'm confident you can find us a warrant.
Okay.
All right, so it sounds like on that one, so Mike is gonna, do an in-person visit, look at the various criteria for a warrant, and Mike will come back next month and let us know what sort of options we have for, justification for a warrant, and then the committee can then make a formal decision on whether or not to implement always stops those intersections.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, can you let us know if you're going to do a pedestrian count? Can you give us the heads up on when that's going to happen?
Sure. You plan some walking trips out there.
Look, I'm just saying, if I have to, if you could let us know when you're going to do that pedestrian count, that'd be helpful.
If I may add, also there are times when we have heavy traffic at that park, and then lighter times. There are times when teams are using the park, baseball teams, different teams. There's times when it's super heavily traveled and times when it's quieter. So you, in fairness, you need to see it, as Cindy was indicating, during a time of heavy use, of normal heavy use.
And that's not now. This is not a great time to count pedestrians based on the season. But we can use historical information based on exactly what you just said, that there's teams that cross here and use there at different times of year. So, as long as there's some justification for the volumes, I think we'll be able to find it. So I'll work on that and report back.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and then, so for 200 Iona, as was mentioned, we did have an opportunity as the, minimal first kind of step in this process of gathering traffic and speed data. In regards to this one, I think it's maybe going to be a little more of an open-ended conversation, and I'm glad Mike is here because we're not just considering one alternative for that. I know at our meeting last month, we talked about a variety of different solutions, but I'm really glad Mike is here because frankly, without him being here to kind of help guide us, all we would just be doing is kind of spinning our wheels on various things. Mike, just I had a chance to chat with Eric a little bit about this. Sorry we couldn't connect earlier this week. Some of the ideas that I believe we discussed last month included speed bumps, raised intersection, even potential changes to the traffic flow or direction in the area, bump outs, a whole sort of menu of options to address this challenge. And Mike, I think you did see, in some of the concerns that were filed, the intersection in particular, my understanding of this concern, that what happens is people go to the end of Windsor and then they turn left there on Iona and then they make that right on Meeting House to get to the traffic light at Meeting House in Montgomery. And again, it's this cut through traffic. People are just trying as quickly as possible to get there without maybe proper regard for folks there. And I've seen personally, that's an area where school bus lets out there at Iona and Meeting House. There's a lot of kids and parents waiting. As people said during public comment this month and last month, there's a lot of children that play in that neighborhood and in that area. And unfortunately, someone lost a pet due to a vehicle in that area. So, so just, whatever we can try and figure out. And to be fair to the people who are here, they also explained to us this has been a documented concern that's been reported to the borough multiple times over the years, even maybe going back as far as, from what I've heard, maybe from saying like 20, 25 years. So I think, I think if we can figure out options that, could help alleviate the problem, I think would be really great for, for the residents here.
Samantha, can I ask a quick question? So speed has never been an issue in Iona, it's volume. Which you have that.
Yeah, and I was actually pretty, I welcome your thoughts, but I was actually, I knew a lot of volume went through there as a cut through, but even I was pretty blown away by some of those volume numbers we saw on that.
Well, that's my question. This is only half of the picture. When the bridge opens up, this will double.
That's a good point.
So my question to you was, did you consider volume with the understanding that would radically increase when the bridge is open?
Well, we haven't considered anything yet.
Okay, but to the engineers, I guess, I would ask us to really understand, this is a very temporary volume.
Right, it's only going to increase.
It is only going to radically increase when the bridge opens because we are the cut through from the south side.
That's true.
Surprising to hear it's going to increase because I was surprised at how high the volumes are right now. So they really are higher volumes than I would have expected to come through from the counts. I did a preliminary review of the counts and the speeding, and you're right. Speeding is not an issue. It's stop sign to stop sign, so it's hard to get too fast going from one stop sign to. I'm sure some people try as if they're using it as a cut through, and it's obviously a cut through with that level of volume. So I can review and present options what we can do. When it's a volume issue, you want to slow them down as much as possible. But the other thing, what I always warn with traffic calming, and I know when you live on Iona, you don't want to hear this, but we got to be careful. If it's a lot of cut through traffic, whatever we do, they're probably still going to want to cut through this area. So we don't want to just kick the can onto a different roadway or send them somewhere that's in worse shape to sort of get through. And we want to make sure we address it in a way that can calm traffic, maintain it, and not jeopardize another roadway just to correct this roadway or make multiple issues out of one issue that we have now. But I was really surprised at how much volume is coming through there. It is pretty significant. So I'm going to look at it and I can make some recommendations. It's not a huge area to work with, which is good and bad. You can only put so many controls. And even looking at speed humps, which isn't always a bad option because it does slow cut through traffic down for sure. And some people don't like to go over speed humps. But, PennDOT doesn't recommend them within 150 feet of an unsignalized intersection. So you can really only fit one in that stretch because there's, by the time you get close, because the speed humps themselves have to be like 300 feet apart. So there's not a ton of room to do a lot, but there's definitely room to do something. Are they taking that turn from Windsor, the left, with speed? Is that part of the problem? Because Windsor's pretty wide there. I know there's striping. So I'm thinking maybe that gore striping on Windsor was put in to try and help sort of slow that turning movement. Because if they use all that available space, they can make that left pretty quick.
So can I answer that?
Sure.
We got the striping and the crossing, what do you call this little like temporary pop-up pedestrian crosswalk warnings to narrow it at the stop sign probably in 2006 when we raised the first. The thought being if you narrowed the intersection, people would stop and slow to make that turn.
Yeah.
But, you know, people just move the pedestrian crossing. I mean, I haven't seen anecdotally any difference in stop sign behavior as a result of painting the street.
And there's two things, Mike, just, background information. Just Cindy lives further up Iona, and so has a lot of, direct experience with this as well. And the other thing to note too, in terms of speed, one of the things we've talked about is that, even though the speed limit is 25, we know and understand and talked about the last meeting that legally we can't reduce the speed limit below 25, but there was some discussion as well about is 25 miles per hour really the speed that people should be going through there, and kind of the consensus was probably not. So even though I know the report showed that the speed was generally in line with the posted speed limit, there was some concern in addition to the volume that whether 25 was the appropriate speed, but I also recognize that it might be, given those legal constraints, it might be easier for us to attack this from, solve this problem from the perspective of reducing volume as opposed to trying to reduce speed, because you would know better than me, like the legalities of that.
Yeah, if you were to change the speed limit there, so right now it's 25, and that's what it's typically supposed to be posted at for that type of roadway. It's you don't even have to do a study to post that roadway 25. You can use PennDOT's residential district, call it that, and post it at 25. To go below that, you would have to base that on a study looking at actual speeds and road conditions, and I can tell you that study would say that 25 is sufficient based on the width of the road and the type of roadway. It's just really hard to do a study that justifies anything underneath 25 miles an hour unless you have severely limited sight distance along the whole roadway, a lot of curves. It's just rarely done. And in this case, it wouldn't fly legally to post below 25. That said, you can come up with ways to calm and reduce cut-through traffic. It already has, one of my favorite traffic calming elements is on-street parking. I swear that really does tend to slow people down sometimes, but that's not going to stop your cut-through traffic. And if they're going 25 with parking on both sides, that really does feel fast on a road like that. I lived on roads like this where it just, even though it's posted 25, yeah, they're not speeding, but 25 miles an hour going by your house with kids playing outside really does feel fast. So we do try and slow them down below the required legal posted speed limit of 25 miles an hour. That's one of the goals of traffic calming, because it's a technique we have, and lowering the speed limit below 25 really isn't a valid technique in most locations.
So, Mike, just for some background, we had this conversation in 2005 too. We've had this multiple times. So if you hear frustration in my voice, that's why. And largely one of the reasons why I ran for council is not understanding why we can't actually do things, which now we do things with Smith. The PennDOT recommendations for two-way traffic and two-side parking, we're about 3 feet under on Iona. So you get a dynamic of chicken. Yeah. Of cars that can't pass. And that's the massive issue with the bus, because once a bus comes, there's no way to pass. I can't even count the number of mirrors that have been washed off. Our car's been nearly totaled twice because we've lost, our parked car has, been a victim of chicken gone bad. So it really is a volume issue. And I'll tell you what has always in the last, since 2005, been the issue is people say, well, we don't want to get other people upset if traffic increases in their street. The burden of Narberth as a cut through is going to lie on the folks on Windsor and Iona. And that's always been the conclusion, right? We've always done this. We've done the speed studies. They say nobody speeds. They do the volume and say, yeah, that's really awful. That's a lot of and then they say, well, if we do anything, the people in Hampton will get upset, or the people here. We even looked at reducing to 15, which is illegal, thinking, oh, on Waze, when Waze came out, we're like, let's make it so Waze reroutes people. Because I agree with you, let's make it as unpleasant as possible for cars. So we've done a lot of this in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, understood. But when I'm looking at this block, and I'm not recommending this yet, but if you did have, say, a speed hump in the middle, right in the center of the block, that really would slow folks down, even cut through traffic, and it's going to make it less enticing for cut through traffic to come through there a little bit. It's not going to totally cut down the volume, because I don't think a single speed hump is going to keep people away, but it really would sort of kind of slow when you have that middle point, that sort of slow down point in the center of the road. So it kind of jumped out at me looking at it that could help. Your next option, if you really want to reduce volume, is starting to ban turning movements. I mean, that's sort of how you eliminate volume, is you literally redirect traffic. And that's sort of a larger study, if we wanted to get into that, of where everyone's going to go if you start to eliminate movements, because there's no, local traffic can only make the left if you live here. There's no way to enforce anything like that. There's no signage like that. So it would impact everybody. Everyone that lived on the street would have to go around that. So I'll look at everything I can with regard to traffic calming along there once I review the volumes a little bit more and go out and look at that now that I have all the information. And I think we should be able to come up with some recommendations that can help. They're not going to overall solve the entire cut-through problem, but hopefully they can help from a safety standpoint.
Yeah, we tried the no left-hand turn and that did nothing. Because again, people only don't turn left if there's a cop sitting there, and we can't pay for a police officer to sit there all morning and night. So yeah, I look forward to it. Look, I'm a big fan of a giant potholes throughout Windsor. Not entire potholes, but annoy you enough that you say I hate Narberth because of the potholes, and you use Montgomery.
Poor roadway maintenance should be in the traffic calming manual. I agree. That should be an element.
That's for sure.
Right. I just wanted to clarify, we have on our agenda the 200 block of Iona, but originally I'm trying to remember, last month we had some complaints about the 300 block as well.
Sorry, I think I worded the agenda. I think it should be 2/300.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's not lost, right? Because we're talking about both blocks.
Oh yeah, this is awful, I should know this. What's the body shop block? Is that the 300 block?
No,
That's 400.
that's 400.
Okay, I mean, we should really add that because that's criminal.
I think all of Iona and turning to Meeting House, I think is what people are kind of talking about. Because a lot of people just go straight to Montgomery. They don't necessarily turn on Meeting House.
Yeah.
I mean, they do, but there's two ways to get out of Narberth.
That's a clarification from me and Mike, so thank you that we're not just looking at the Meeting House cut through, but also people going all the way down I-99 too.
Yeah, just Mike, I'm thinking, you mentioned the speed bump, but if there could be like a rate, you know this better, the options, but if the problem area really spreads across, say, more than one block of Iona, then maybe we're looking at the intersection there. You'll advise us.
Yeah, I'll take a look. I mean, you can do a raised intersection. So that's more in line where you have a lot of peds crossing an intersection, and if you have folks ignoring the stop signs and kind of running through, that's where you can correct that. Speed humps are away from the stop. And again, the speed humps I'm talking about are 12 feet long. It's not a bump. You're supposed to be able to take them at around 50 miles an hour without too much jarring. So we don't want to slow down emergency vehicles for sure. And if you put those bumps or anything too drastic, it really delays response time for emergency vehicles. They do not like it. So the humps are something they can get over pretty easily, and they slow people down to about 15 miles an hour. They can also be used if there were a mid-block crosswalk or something like that. You can kind of have a flat area on top of the speed hump as a raised crosswalk and put that across. I don't think that's needed here because you have pedestrian crossings at the intersections, which are pretty close by. But again, I'll take a look, and it's good to know that this goes all the way up Iona. I was kind of focusing on that section in between. But yeah, I guess, it's signalized up there at Montgomery on Iona too, so they can get there that way. There's a couple different ways to cut through this area.
And Meeting House, and there's about to be 2 apartment complexes at Meeting House and to that volume. In the meantime, I guess this is more of a question for Andrea. In the police monthly report in November, there's not a single citation for speeding or stop sign that was written in Narberth.
So
could we ask the police to really enforce rolling through stop signs?
stop signs, yes, and I will make mention that to the sergeant. Speeding is a little more complicated. You really need 2 officers on duty to measure the speed of the vehicles going by.
Illegal speeding. I mean, what the
That-
data is showing, but stop signs, I would ask the police to sit and we should see an increase in stop sign.
I will speak to the sergeant about that. And when we're up to a full capacity at the police department, we'll be in a better position to aggressively address this speeding.
And I guess the last thing I just want to throw out here, unless anyone else, and of course unless anyone else says anything, just from me, Mike, it also sounds like what I'm hearing from the committee is that while maybe in certain cases you don't want to just shift the problem, it does sound like there is some openness to, if we're able to maybe, for a better word, diffuse, D-I-F-F-U-S-E, diffuse the traffic among multiple streets. You know, I'm just making up numbers here, but let's just say like if a 10% increase in traffic on another road, you know, solved 80% of the problem in this area, it doesn't sound like that's something the committee would necessarily be opposed to, as opposed to maybe how past practice or other communities handle that situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, it's very difficult to say, unless you're banning a movement and you know you're directing someone else, it's very difficult to say what percentage is going to not want to use this route anymore because of, say, a speed hump. But the numbers you threw out, Samantha, are probably good goal numbers, right? We want to reduce the cut-through volume on Iona to some degree. We don't want to put all of it onto another street, but some of it could go onto another street and you know, spread the pain a little bit is one way to put it, without sending all of the pain to a different location, I guess is one way to put it. But yeah, that's kind of the goal. You're not going to reduce cut through without it going somewhere else. They're not going to avoid Narberth altogether. But if they're really, it seems like they're really focusing on this one location, and it's detrimental to everyone that lives on that section. So we'll have to come up with a solution.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
All right, you guys done with me? I guess you're done with traffic. I'll log off.
Yeah, I think we're good at this point, Mike.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing everyone next month.
Thanks,
Great.
Mike.
Have a good weekend.
You too. So, next on the agenda, we have the fire company and the burning regulations. I thought we could just take a minute or two on that, because we have that suggested ordinance that came to us from the fire chief. And I was able to review that with Cindy and also Bob, because Bob was not at our December meeting, and I wanted to just talk through it with him. So maybe we could just look at that together for a minute, and then we could decide as a committee what we're comfortable with and kind of hand it over.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the main issue for me is the fire pits. I want to be sure that residents of the borough can continue to use fire pits, you know, without kind of undue restrictions. And the way this ordinance is written, you know, it's mostly about kind of open burning, which is not, you know, not the normal scenario. And then there's one clause that pertains to fire pits. And it has a restriction that the fire pit must be 15, I think it's 15 feet.
It was 15 feet.
15 feet from any structure or combustible item. And that, I think it's that number that I want to suggest we revise downward because of the nature of Narberth. I mean, I went out to measure in my backyard, and you know, we tend to have very small yards. We tend to be very close to our neighbors. So I think 15 feet is too high, you know, and it would mean that many people are kind of out of compliance.
Yeah.
So I would suggest bringing that down to 5 feet, just given, you know, the way that we need to tailor it for our community. And Cindy, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah,
You're
no,
comfortable with that?
I mean, I appreciate Bill and his work.
Yeah.
But I do agree. I mean, I measured too. My yard isn't big enough to be able to handle that, and I would hate to set an ordinance that most people are going to be out of compliance, that maybe we just scale it for what Narberth is. So we could just discuss 10 feet, or maybe, now you're saying 5 feet, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm open to it, but I just want it to be workable, given our scale. And, obviously, we're doing this because we want to ensure that, that everyone is safe, and we're listening to the fire chief's concerns. But, yeah, I don't want it to be overly stringent.
And I'm comfortable with 10.
10? Okay.
And I have to say, when I look at those numbers, I'm so thankful for Bill, because I never even thought about food trucks, or when we have gas grills at events near buildings that have gone completely unregulated, and people don't think about these things, people like us, until something goes amok, and you hear an awful story about someone not manning a gas grill next to a school event, and we had none of this before. I mean, I didn't even think about food truck placements in buildings and events until this came before us.
Okay, so, oh yeah, it is currently, I'm looking at, this is 307.4.3, portable outdoor fireplaces is the term that's used for fire pits. And so it's that clause that we're really focused on. And it says, shall not be operated within 15 feet of a structure.
So it sounds like what we'll do then, I'll follow up with Bill, make sure there's no major legal issue or anything like that with bumping it down to 10.
Okay.
If Bill's good with that, then I can go on to Borough Council.
Yeah.
If Bill is not okay with that, then we can maybe invite him back here next month and talk with him about it.
Okay, good.
And when you're having the conversation with Bill too, can we maybe work with the NBA and community groups to say, hey, here are, when you have outside grilling or food truck vendors or something, here is the ordinance, here are the expectations and the rules?
Yeah, well, I think a separate item for this committee that we talked off and on about that I would, again, love to have time for is some sort of like special event permit to formalize, and I think part of that would have like regulations like that on it.
Okay.
So yes, that is a good idea, and I think that's probably the best method to make it happen.
All right, that sounds good. And my thanks to Bill for putting that together for us so that we can have that in place. Okay, so anything else, Samantha, that we need to, we have the police report. We have the PAC I know is meeting, and I'll be checking with their chair. I would expect in the spring we would have an update.
Trash.
Yeah, the trash. Is there anything that we need to start working on with regard to the trash? I don't think there's anything we could really do in 10 minutes. I mean, I could introduce the issue, but I don't think we'll, like, why we need to talk about this, but I don't think we'll be able to get further than that this morning. Is that something that we'll want to kind of move up the agenda for next month, do you think, or? I think so, and I think hopefully, you know, the open burning at this point will move on to council. You know, we didn't have to spend a lot of time on that this morning. I think, you know, those depend on how long we have discussion in regards to the traffic concerns from items 5.2 and 5.3. We could potentially really start out next month, but we're probably looking at, with some certainty, probably 2 months from now, and when we'd really be able to dig into this and really start working on that. But there might be a chance next month we can really start to get into it. Okay. So it's just a prime it here for this morning before we adjourn. So this year's our last year of our contract with Republic Services, and in addition to that, last year Cindy brought to the office's attention a resident concern about just a whole slew of individual trash toters being piled, put out for collection, completely blocking the sidewalk. And I was like, oh, that doesn't seem quite right. And so I looked at our trash contract with Republic. I'm like, oh, that's how we're providing service to multi-unit residential dwellings, is we're giving them a trash toter for every single unit. And then I also then was like, okay, well, does our solid waste ordinance say anything about, preventing you from just monopolizing the sidewalk with trash toters? And unfortunately, I then found that our solid waste ordinance has not been updated since at least 1986, because it references what our trash rate in 1986 was. It also specifically says when the borough is going to pick up your trash and what we're going to pick up, and it dictates how we're going to do that in ways that, in frankly, no way, shape, or form align with our contract with Republic. So, and then it has no language really about when you put your toter out, how early you can put it out, how long you can leave it out. So I just think it just needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. I think the ordinance itself should not have the collection methods dictated. It should not have the fee dictated. It should reference, other contracts or materials as we update those things. And then it needs to have regulations about, when you can put your toters out and the method of putting them out and how long and all those sort of things. And I think that'll solve the concerns, and I think it'll bring us to a much better place from a legal standpoint. And I think that it'll also help inform our discussion of how we're going to provide trash service beyond the Republic contract. I think that's a conversation this committee will need to have as well. We could certainly continue, we could do another bid for another contract, and if Republic's a little better, then we would continue with that. But I think before committing to that decision, we should have some conversation about our options.
And that's something that I don't want to discuss now, but do want to also suggest that there's some crossover in finance and administration.
Yeah.
That perhaps we should kind of talk about. If I'm being honest, my experience with our trash contracts over the years has kind of been similar to the debate between Comcast and Verizon. Who do you want to be aggravated and frustrated with this time? And that seems to just be the landscape of this work.
Oh, I agree, and that was definitely my experience in my last municipality, where I, for the first time ever, implemented contracted trash hauling as well as here.
But I do want to thank you. So I did bring to our attention again the resident complaint of, how is an entire sidewalk blocked by 25 cans? It's not the first time we've had that complaint come before council in the 6 years I've been here. So I appreciate you actually taking it seriously and saying this is a quality of life issue, and I'm going to take a look at it.
Well, we've stressed, in public in multiple venues, and how important it is that Narberth is a walkable community, and the importance of our sidewalks in that space. So.
Yeah, well, and it fits well. I mean, this spring we're beginning the sidewalk maintenance
True,
program.
inspections will really be going on, yeah.
So the timing is right. So we would want to have this revised ordinance in place before we negotiate the next contract. Is that the kind of timeline?
I think you could probably do it in parallel, because we're really going to need, if we do decide to continue contracted trash hauling, we're probably going to need to put an RFP out, probably by June at the latest. And that means before June, we're going to need to figure out what sort of service we want, what the contract says, in order to be able to get bids back in time and do all the rigmarole that then goes into accepting a bidder. And if we did change bidders or change the service, we would then need a buffer period to make sure that residents know, so people January 1 aren't like, what's going on with my trash?
Right. Okay. All right. Well, that'll probably be a big part of our work this year. Yeah. Well, okay. So I think we've reached the end of the meeting, unless there's anything I'm missing.
Just, we're asking now council to each committee chair to put, here are some agenda items that the public may want to know on a radar, push out on the flash or social media, and the committee was going to decide for the chair and let that know. So just, if you can let me know, you sent me that email, here what you're talking about. Maybe we could just make that standard operating procedure in each committee to say, hey, let's put this on the public's radar, and I'll coordinate that with staff.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Okay.
I think that weekly email is a great way to keep people apprised of
What's going on?
Of our discussions. before it gets to this decision. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all. I think we're adjourned.
You have to do a formal motion.
Oh, we do?
Okay,
Okay.
to adjourn.
Right, so
All right,
second
I'll
motion.
second.
Yeah,
Rob, second, all in favor.
All right, thank you, Samantha. Bye, Andrea.
yeah.
Yeah, good to
See ya.